And now, the First Alert Storm Team, live from the 13 Now digital desk. This is Tropic Topics, sponsored by Peden Heating and Air Conditioning and Mariana Toyota.
Hey everyone, I'm Chief Meteorologist Ross Whitley, and we are doing Tropic Topics today. And unfortunately, we have to actually talk about something. We're not quite sure exactly what we're going to get out of this. There's a lot of uncertainty still to be had, but you've by now seen on social media and or somewhere tracking Invest 98L, which is at the bottom of the screen there. So first of all, I want to start out here. I'm going to be answering questions, going to try to get to all of the information that we can. We're going to dissect the possibilities of where this may inevitably go as well. So if you have any questions, concerns, comments, things like that, if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can just type that into the comment section. I've got all of the pages pulled up. So whether you're watching on Kristen's page, my page, Grace's page, or the station's page, we can see those comments. So if you got comments or questions, concerns, go ahead and put those in there and we will get to them when we get to them. But I'll probably answer a lot of those questions as we do go along. I will reiterate that if you're asking for a specific location's forecast, I'm not going to do that. It would be impossible for me to go over every specific location and the forecast of what you want to do. And at this point in time, we're still talking about ifs of the storm. We're really not talking about impacts because we can't. We don't know exactly where the storm's going to go, which means we can't really talk about the impacts. Now, there are possibilities of solution, and today we are starting to narrow down those possibilities because we're getting a better understanding of A, where the storm is going to develop, and B, what drivers are impacting the system and how that could potentially impact the storm as we do go forward. So those are good things as far as the forecast is concerned, and that certainly does help things out, at least on my standpoint of time. And yes, I want to start this out. I thought about this a long time as we were going throughout the day. I want everyone to do this with me. Just take a big breath in for 3 seconds. Let's just go ahead and exhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, do you feel better? A little more relaxed, a little less on edge? Probably not, because the potential for a storm is coming in this direction. But just want everyone to take a second to breathe. Yes, we could see a storm. Yes, that is possible. It could be a significant storm. Yes, that is possible. What you've been seeing on all of those hype pages, those are real possible solutions, but that doesn't mean that that's exactly what's going to happen. And you have to keep in mind, just because our storm of record, the storm that we're going to go back to and think of immediately when we're talking about the potential for a significant storm, is going to be Hurricane Michael. Just as before Hurricane Michael, everybody's storm of record was Opal or Eloise. So just go ahead and get that through your head. This will not be Michael, regardless of the storm, regardless of where it goes. This is not going to be the same type of event because every storm is different. You could take Michael and you could change the just path as it was coming in just slightly, and you're going to get a completely different outcome as to what happened across the area. So keep that in mind. Even though we do have the potential for a storm to come into this area, the impacts are going to be different. Who feels what is going to be different, and what happens across our area is going to be different. And that's if we get a storm. So at this point in time, there's still plenty of time for this to change as we do go on forward. So let's keep that in mind. We'll dive right into it here if we can. And again, if you got questions, comments, and concerns, go ahead and put those in the comment section, and I will get to them when I can. I do have all of the things up and ready to go. So we're starting out here with the radar across our area, and we actually do have a weak cold front coming in at the moment, which is why you can see the wind shifting to out of the north and west. That's going to help some of these temperatures suppress just a little bit as we go into our Monday, or rather our Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We should see those temperatures a little more manageable, climbing only up into the upper 80s and low 90s instead of the mid 90s. So that's certainly going to help impacting things, at least as far as how it feels. Now, water temperatures, I harp on this all year long, all the time, because we have warm water temperatures doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see a significant storm. I know that's counterproductive to what I am talking about today, but you have to have a storm that can take advantage of that. You have to have an environment that can take advantage of that. And unfortunately, in this situation, we have the warm water temperatures. They're anywhere between about 84 and 86 across the Gulf of Mexico. All you need is 80-degree water temperatures to sustain tropical activity. Any degree warmer than 80 is just adding heat content to the flux of energy that is available to the storm. So the warmer the water does matter, but not as significantly as everyone likes to act like it does. You have to have high relative humidity values, which is the dry air we've been talking about in the Atlantic all year long. And you have to have low wind shear aloft, because we don't want those thunderstorms. You want a strong system. You don't want those thunderstorms being sheared off. You want that column of air to go vertically stacked. You want high pressure aloft, so it's calm conditions overhead, so that that storm can radiate out all that energy and really intensify. So all of those things matter equally as warm water temperature does. So just because the water's warm doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have significant storms. In this case, we have a favorable environment on all three aspects. We have warm water, we're going to have high relative humidity values, and we're likely going to have high pressure overhead. We're in fact even going to see wind shear being in favor of this storm as it does work into the Gulf of Mexico. That's why this has gotten so much attention from not only the social meteorologists, the individuals that don't have a Met degree, that don't know what they're talking about, but are going to post things anyways. Those individuals, they're getting a lot of attention because they're posting these scary solutions. Well, in this case, scary solutions are a real possibility because we do have a very favorable environment. So that is one thing to keep in mind as we do go forward. And that's why this has gotten so much attention, is because those solutions are very possible. Now, there's a lot of other possible solutions that do come in. Just because we have those cases doesn't mean that that's exactly what's going to verify. The tilt of the storm, the shear that it's undergoing under in development will matter as to how this develops and how quickly it develops as well. So going on from the water temperature, we are still in peak hurricane season. We stay in peak hurricane season until about October 1st, which coincidentally, if the storm were to come in our direction, would be right around October 1st. And then we have a secondary peak around October 20th. So it's possible that you have another round. And this season looks to be more backloaded than it was, because obviously through peak season, we didn't see a whole lot of activity. And now we have Gaston out in the Atlantic. We have FIONA out in the Atlantic. We have three other areas of interest in the Atlantic, possibly Hermine tomorrow, and maybe Ian for this storm. I'll get to more on that in just a second. But overall, we are talking about a lot of activity out there. So moving on forward here as we do go through the rest of peak season, hopefully this activity that we're getting ready to talk about is the last of it as we do go forward. So I always like to talk about dry air and how the dry air and what the environment looks like. You can see that over the main development region, there's plenty of dry air. However, in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, there is none, which also goes back to how favorable this environment is. Those two areas of interest that are out into the mid-Atlantic, they're probably going to be choked out by dry air and then eventually wind shear and stabler conditions. So there's quite a lot of activity. First, we'll start with FIONA, and FIONA is interesting in itself, and we could do a whole video on FIONA because this is going to go under extratropical transition over Nova Scotia and into Canada, and you've got to have the perfect conditions. That means trough and storm aligning correctly to get that kind of extratropical transition. And for that to happen over land is a extreme rarity. It doesn't happen very often. And what we're talking about here is a Hurricane Sandy type of situation, a Hurricane Grace type of situation, the perfect storm, if you will, where a trough and a hurricane are merging together and creating basically like a superstorm. The dynamics change a little bit as you go from warm core to cold core as to what can actually verify down to the surface. But again, as far as the meteorological aspect of it, FIONA has a very interesting future ahead of it. And FIONA is part of the reason why we are so interested in 98L, because its wind shear from this is actually inhibiting the storm at the moment from being able to develop, because the shear out of the north, off around FIONA, is actually helping to keep this storm suppressed. So you can see the track of FIONA right there, where it has gone and went through the Leeward Islands as well as the Lesser Antilles, and then up into the Greater Antilles and eventually into the Turks and Caicos, and now is going to be close brush to Bermuda. It should be just off to the west, but you can see the projection here all the way up into Nova Scotia showing a Category 1 staying intact. So they're saying the warm core will stay intact even as it does go under that extratropical transition. So it's possible that they may mix down there in Canada, maybe 100 mile per hour wind gusts, possibly 110 mile per hour wind gusts, that type of situation. Certainly possible for Canada, not something you say very often. And then that storm will no longer be tropical once it works up into the northern parts of Canada. We also have Gaston out there. This is headed toward the Azores. Not an issue for anyone across anybody except for the Azores. And it's a tropical storm. This is not a very strong storm, but it is on the verge of a hurricane. It's just 65-mile-per-hour storm. Remember, hurricane is 74-mile-per-hour winds. It's moving east-northeast at 21. This is going to do a kind of a loop out there and eventually die in the wake of its own track as it tracks back toward where it was, so that eventually will fade on out. So now the reason why you're watching, which is 98L, that's what everyone is getting into and what is getting all of the information here. So if you don't know what you're looking at, this is where the storm is at the moment. It is a very broad rotation. It is a very weak rotation. That's because Fiona off to the north there is creating outflow and wind shear out of the north, which is shearing all of these clouds in this direction. You can see the cloud cover here being sheared off to the south. There's a really weak low-level circulation right in here. So if you can see that very closely, it's kind of a naked swirl, as they would say, and it looks like I drew a cyclops. But it's kind of a naked swirl because the cloud tops, it's not being allowed to develop any kind of convection. And for storms to strengthen, they need to be able to produce thunderstorms around that center and stretch that column up. So that's what you need for a system to strengthen. And certainly we're not going to have that with the way it looks right now. Now, eventually, this center is going to move generally in this direction. So we're going to see the storm move in that direction. And as it gets closer to Jamaica, that's when we really should see this storm start to get its foothold and become a developed system. So I think by the time we get into probably late day Saturday or through the day on Sunday, maybe as late as early Monday, we probably will have at least a tropical depression down there. We may have a tropical storm. And it's possible by the time we get into Monday, we may already have a hurricane somewhere around Jamaica at that point in time. So that's what we're watching. That's the current setup across 498L, and I'm going to erase that for you. And again, if you got questions, comments, concerns, just go ahead and put them in the comment section, and I will try to get to them when I can. Again, we got lots and lots to cover here. Let's go into now what the possibilities are. So I showed this on air yesterday, and I have updated this. The GFS, the Global Forecasting System, or the American model, it has currently the latest run, which is the 12Z, does have a landfall sometime on Friday, next Friday, as a strong, significant system in Pensacola. So that's basically where it's putting the storm right now. However, the newest Euro that just came in actually has the storm making landfall sometime Tuesday, Wednesday around Fort Myers. So you get the idea here that there's a significant difference in the two main modeling systems that we use, which conveys the amount of uncertainty here as to where this storm inevitably does go. And there's a whole bunch of factors that are contributing to that. And yes, it's still possible, but looks less likely now that we do have that low-level circulation starting to show up, that this kind of fades into Central America. That's still a possibility, and that there's no storm at all. But for right now, it doesn't look like that is as likely as it did yesterday, just because we do now have at least a swirl down there. So we have a trackable entity, which means that this will probably be gaining latitude and it will probably start to organize, even though it is undergoing shear. Where you see the purple, that is all areas that could be impacted, and those are all areas that are still showing some kind of ensemble support, meaning that one iteration or run of the models here is showing a solution in that purple area. So you can see just how massive of an area that is. And again, that goes back to the uncertainty as to where this storm will go. Now, I think there are more likely solutions at this point in time. But again, going back to uncertainty. So speaking from this point forward in this video, we are talking in the hypothetical range here. So I'm not giving you a forecast. I'm not saying this is exactly what the storm is going to do. What I'm saying is, if the storm were to do this, this should be the outcome. So we're going to go over the possibilities now. So again, you should be a little more relaxed at this point in time. There's still plenty of time for things to change going forward. And you can see the uncertainty between just the two main models that are usually pretty close together. And whenever they're separated apart, that means that there are a whole bunch of possibilities that are still on the table. And again, Euro South Florida, GFS West Panhandle. So much different as far as overall solutions. So let's go through the first possibility solution here. And I meant to just go ahead and ignore this right here. I meant to delete that. This is a reused slide from something else, and I forgot to delete those words. So just bear with me here. That's not what I meant to do. So this is the solution, more of what the Euro is showing at this point in time. And you'll note that the circulation is right about here. I made this slide last night. Yay, Ross. I'm actually doing a fairly good job with tracking the system just based off of what I can draw. But overall, what the Euro is showing here is high pressure ridge coming in behind a cold front, and the storm basically tracking closer to Jamaica. So closer to the island right there, and then basically impacting some portion of Cuba, the western tip of Cuba, and then hitting the ridge, or rather hitting the cold front and then being turned off to the north. So on the cold front, what you should see is behind it with the high pressure systems, you have wind out of the north and west. In front of it, you have wind out of the south and west. So that should steer the storm to the north and east. Now, also what's going on that I did not draw is a high pressure system in the Atlantic. And typically, high pressure system bias in the GFS is a weaker Atlantic ridge. And what that typically allows is for the storm to be further to the east. Well, in this case, the Atlantic ridge is going to be influence a north turn, not a western solution. So I'm going to clear all of the drawings that I'm doing here out. And with that, what the GFS is allowing with a weaker high pressure system here is that it's not grabbing and turning the storm to the north, which is allowing the storm to be further off to the west, which is actually counterintuitive to the model's bias, but it is still along with that model's bias. So this solution is more in line with the Euro. And in this case, where the Euro is, I would say any portion along the western peninsula, and then again, as the storm potentially could cross over and then come back, any area on the eastern peninsula, southern tip, and then even up through the Carolinas would likely need to be paying attention to this storm and should be paying attention to this storm at this point in time. Now, there's other possible solutions. The western solution, which we'll get to in just a second, is looking less likely now just because of the way the models have handled it. So you can see as we zoom in here that the areas being impacted most likely are anywhere from the bend down through the Keys. That would be the direct impact if this were to play out. So this means that the Atlantic ridge is slightly stronger. The storm gains latitude faster. It ends up closer to Jamaica as it is tracking and then goes through Cuba. And there's an emphasis on that it will have to interact with land. So in this case, as far as the ensembles go, you're talking about the weaker solutions as far as the models are showing. Now, this still could be a strong solution because what the Euro shows is the storm rapidly strengthening in the Caribbean and then interacting with Cuba and weakening somewhat, and then also strengthening as it goes through the Gulf of Mexico. But obviously, as we're zoomed in here, you can see that the distance between Cuba and Florida here is far less significant than the distance between Cuba and our area. So there's a whole lot more water to go across here if the storm is further off to the west as opposed to if the storm is further off to the east, which is also why the models do show a weaker solution, somewhat weaker solution, if this does in fact end up being crossing Cuba and then going into South Florida. It may not be as strong of a solution. And I'm not going to go into numbers here because, again, we're talking in hypotheticals here. These are the possibilities of what could potentially happen. So obviously there's other potential possibilities as we do go forward. And the other possibilities, of course, are, well, what if the storm is a little bit slower, a little bit weaker, and a little further south, more in line with what the GFS is showing. In this case, the front misses the storm. It goes underneath it. We're also saying that the ridge over here is weaker, which means that the northerly influence isn't as much. So that means that the westerly influence is greater. So notice that we are further away from Jamaica at this point in time. So that means that the storm likely gets really going somewhere in this area. So further off to the west of Jamaica and closer to the Yucatan Peninsula is a solution where the system likely ends up much further off to the west as opposed to impacting South Florida or the peninsula of South Florida. Now, in this case, I still think that your trough, which is likely going to be extended weaker, but across the northern Gulf of Mexico, you're still going to get a turn. So it's still going to turn somewhat. It's probably just not going to be as sharp of a turn in this case, which means that you're putting more of the bend and the panhandle at risk if this solution does verify. And these are all plausible solutions, and in my mind, a situation that could evolve based off of what we are seeing. And these are the most likely solutions, at least in my mind. So keep in mind that this is me going through all the data, looking at the steering currents, and coming up with what makes the most logical sense. And again, ignore that because I meant to delete this. I reused these slides and then I just copied them and I forgot that there was a word over there. So zooming on in here, we'll be able to see the coastline a little more clearly and what potential areas would still be impacted. So again, think about it this way. If the storm is somewhere in here, in that area, you're still going to impact this coast with storm surge, probably some wind, maybe rain, probably outer bands and tornadoes, even if the storm does go into that area. So you're still impacting the peninsula, even the southern peninsula, if the storm is even further off to the west. So you never want to be on the east side of the storm because the east side of the storm extends much further as far as impacts go than the west side of the storm. Basically, the west side of the storm, once you're outside of the inner core of the storm, you're really reducing impacts quite significantly. Of course, eye wall is eye wall. Doesn't matter where you are in the eye wall, western eye wall, eastern eye wall, it doesn't matter. You're going to see significant impacts. So again, if the storm is further off to the west, you're still impacting the peninsula, but less so than a direct impact. And that obviously brings the panhandle into play. Also, this is a lot of water between here and there. And that would likely mean, with favorable conditions, that you're talking about a stronger solution to how the storm does play out. So keep that in mind as we do go forward, that a storm heading more toward the panhandle or even toward the bend or even toward Tampa will likely be stronger than a storm heading toward South Florida because it's going to spend more time over the Gulf of Mexico. If there's any good news to take away from the potential of a storm being in the Gulf of Mexico is that unlike our storm of record going back, Hurricane Michael, this probably won't be a super fast mover as it's in the Gulf of Mexico, which likely means that it does churn up the water a touch. It will probably push colder water to the shelf, and per typical with Gulf hurricanes, storms weaken as they come ashore because they're running over that upwelled water on the shelf. So in most model solutions, you actually see the system weakening as it's coming ashore. And in most of the ensembles, you actually see that represented as well. So in my mind, that's pointing to the fact that we would likely see a weakening storm as it is coming ashore. Now, keep in mind, any turn to the east is going to completely mitigate that because you're going to be running over non-upwelled water because that's going to be warmer water. So do keep that in mind as well. So this is just hypotheticals. This is just potential here. If there's good news to be taken away from that, that's the good news. So trying to keep things in reality here. So let's go to the other solution, which looks far less likely now as the system does have at least a low-level center. And again, the low-level center is somewhere down in here. So all of these still have a potential to be correct. But in this case, what we're talking about, basically what the GFS was showing yesterday, it's not really showing this anymore. It's still a possibility. It still could happen, but it seems less likely today than it did yesterday. Again, still possible, but it could happen. So in this case, this is what really opens it up to the western Gulf of Mexico, say Louisiana, Mississippi, even eastern Gulf of Mexico, Alabama, the Panhandle, possibly even Texas. But I think that this ridge really has to come in much stronger and dive much further south, which means that you got to get a wind somewhere around in here to drive the storm in this direction. So Texas, I don't want to say you're okay at the moment, but it just doesn't seem likely that you're going to get a storm to go that far west. So Louisiana back over to the peninsula and then up through the Carolinas, those seem like a much more plausible solution than Texas does at this point in time. Now, with that said, if our low-level center that's here, that's showing up now, gets ejected to the north and never really develops, and we just have an open wave, and the storm ends up somewhere down in here. So we're talking about toward Guatemala, in that area. If we get that kind of solution before the storm can develop, well, then it's got to run over land a couple of times. And then the high pressure ridge really does come into play. And you get the potential for something like this, where the storm ends up over here and probably fades and dies. So if there's any solution that we all should be rooting for, it's this solution, because that would be a storm that just never really happens. That doesn't seem likely at this point in time, but it is still possible. So say we get a storm that does track further off to the south and west, but doesn't end up in Central America, basically along the lines of the blue line here, goes across the northern Yucatan Peninsula and ends up somewhere in this area. That really opens up anything from Louisiana all the way to the Bend as potential significant storms, because what happens is as this gets missed, you don't really get a turn to the east because the trough doesn't matter anymore. So you're not going to have an influence pulling anything really off to the east at that point in time. And you will have a slight influence with this ridge to the north, which means the storm probably is much, much slower through this region, which again does go back to the upwelling water to the shelf solution, where we likely see peak intensity in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and then weakening as it's coming ashore, because in this solution, you lose all steering currents. And that means the storm just basically kind of drifts north and goes like that. That's basically what the GFS has shown over the last 4 or 5 runs, is that the ridge over here is so weak that it's only a western tilt. The trough doesn't matter. You don't get any pull off to the north. And this basically goes around the Atlantic ridge and then drifts off to the north. So I'll clear out all my scribbles so you can see. But that's what the GFS has been showing. And it is possible. I think the GFS is having some issues as far as bias goes in this area. So I don't think that the GFS is entirely correct at this point in time, mainly because as the GFS goes through the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, for whatever reason, it has a really bad, spurious type of bias, which means that it spins up vorticity that doesn't exist. We've seen that in the model runs where it has shifted the center even after the storm has formed into a hurricane. So that could have track implications, and that could be part of the reason why it is so much further west than the other models, which are closer to the Euro solution, but kind of in the middle. So this possibility seems less likely to me, but that's just me. Again, the models do still show this kind of solution as a possibility, so it is still just as viable as anything else at this point in time. Going back to the uncertainty of all of this is that, yeah, there is a whole lot of potential solutions. And in my opinion, this is probably one of the worst outcomes that we could have, because then the storm gets to track all the way across the entirety of the Gulf of Mexico and take advantage of the very favorable conditions. It doesn't have any influence from the overall front. And this is probably, where we see max potential for this storm. So going back, what everybody thinks about when they're talking about categories is everyone automatically jumps to a category 5 as, oh, is it going to be a 5? Well, it doesn't matter. If it's a major, it's a major. If you're directly impacted under the eye wall, you're going to have, guess what? Major impacts. That's why it's called a major hurricane. So 3, 4, or 5, it doesn't matter. Major is major. Do not concentrate on category. Do not concentrate on wind, especially as we get closer to this event and the potential impacts. Concentrate on the impacts for your area, wherever you're watching from, whether you're watching from South Florida or you're watching from Louisiana or Alabama or Mississippi. Your forecast is going to be different than other areas. So this storm is going to impact everyone differently. So focus on those impacts, not the actual center of the storm and the highest wind speeds, all of that. Those things in relativity don't really matter. They only matter to the individuals that are directly impacted by the eye wall of a system. So think about impacts, not where the center of the storm is going to go. Because obviously, if the storm does make this kind of trek, where it's in this range, so anywhere from the Bend to Louisiana, anything off to the west, if the storm goes off here, this whole area still has to deal with storm surge, banding, rain, all of that kind of stuff. off. So if there is a storm off to the west, I mean, think back to when we had Laura. We still had banding coming through the Panhandle. Think to Sally, which made landfall in Alabama over here. We had tornadoes and flooding across the Panhandle. So just because a storm goes to our west doesn't necessarily mean that we're in the clear. We're still going to see impacts if a storm does eventually go off in that direction. So moving forward here, now that we've kind of gone over the possibilities of the kinds of things, let's start talking about what we should be doing right now and what your mind should be going through, because we've gone through the whole potential here. So in my mind, based off of where the GFS is and where the Euro is, kind of highlighting the coastline, basically all of the western coastline of Florida down to the Keys, and then including even over to Mississippi. Those are the areas that in my mind right now have the highest potential to be impacted by this storm. That doesn't mean that the storm is going in those locations. It would be impossible to hit the Keys and Mississippi all simultaneously. You can't have a storm go traverse the whole coastline. Like, that's not going to happen. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is, at this point in time, those are the areas that I would be most concerned about potentially dealing with a direct impact of the storm. This is a huge area. So we're talking about a very wide range. In the yellow area, that's areas that should be watching and prepping. And in the green areas, that's areas that should be watching and prepping. It's just colored in green. So basically all of the Gulf of Mexico and up to the Carolinas. So a little humor in there. Yes. Yeah, the yellow and green, they're the same thing. They mean the same thing. Everyone should be going through their checklist. They should be checking their hurricane prep kit. They should be making sure that they have supplies going forward, or at least thinking about how to get the supplies going forward. Should be thinking about how to prep and prepare in the coming days. There is plenty of time still for the solutions to work through. And as we go forward, going into the weekend, we should have a little more confidence as to what the potential here is for the storm and how this storm is going to play out, as there is a whole lot more information today than what we had yesterday. There's still a lot of uncertainty onto where the storm goes, the potential strength of the storm, who gets impacted, who's not impacted. All of those kinds of things are still up in the air. So there's still plenty of time for things to change between now and then. But it basically, if you're on the Carolinas, or you're on the peninsula, or you're on the coastline in Mississippi and Alabama or Louisiana, even far eastern Texas, I'd be watching the storm and I'd be going through the exact same steps. I'd be thinking about where my kit is, where my supply is, and all of the things that I need just in case to get ready. So no matter where you are in the Gulf of Mexico or what possibilities are out there, you should be watching this storm, paying attention, and having all of those things get ready. So my favorite graphic that I've ever made is the Ready, Set, Go graphic. Now, obviously, we don't have a cone yet because we don't have an official storm, but you see everyone shaded in the green there is in the ready stage. That means 5+ days out from the potential impact of the storm. It means you should be putting together and have your hurricane kit stored. You should have done that already. We're in hurricane season. But you should have enough supplies for you and your whole family. That includes pets. Think about the pets as well, especially if you're planning to evacuate. Say a storm were to head this way and you're planning you're going to get up and take everything. Make sure you're thinking about the pets as well. Think about your neighbors, all of those things, people that may need things that may not be in the same situation that you're in. Try to help them out as well, because everybody has to deal with this if we do end up in a storm. And this speaks to everyone in the green. So I'm talking to everybody here. I'm not just specifically talking to Panama City. I'm sure we have more viewers in my area than the rest of the area, but I am talking about everyone highlighted in the green here should be going through those kind of steps. Nobody's in the set area yet. No one. Because we don't know exactly where this storm is going to go. What I do have on there are the spaghetti models, and it shows you the range of where the hurricane models think that this is going to inevitably end up. And it ranges really from the solutions that we showed. So anything from crossing Cuba to ending up in the Yucatan Peninsula, which obviously has implications as to where the storm inevitably does end up as well. So again, have those kits and things ready to go. Get prepped and ready just in case. Now, this is the ultimate if solution here. So we're talking ifs the storm were to head in your direction, what would the timeline be? I thought that this was practical. So I'm not saying that this is what is going to happen. I'm saying if a storm was to head in this direction, this is the timeline that you should expect it. So basically what we got here is down around the Keys in South Florida, the storm would likely be approaching the area Monday, Tuesday, or impacting the area Monday, Tuesday. So going up to Fort Myers, it would be probably Tuesday, Wednesday, could be approaching the area Monday, impacting the area Tuesday, Wednesday. So take a day back from what I have posted here, and that's approaching and then impacting. So Tampa up to the Bend, we're talking about Wednesday, Thursday, so probably approaching the area going into Tuesday, and then impacting the area possibly as early as Wednesday, maybe as late as Thursday. From the Bend through the Panhandle, possibly as far west as Mississippi, we're talking about Thursday, Friday. So in this case, we'd probably be talking about, depending on how far west the system did go and how long it meandered in the Gulf of Mexico, we're probably talking about approaching the area Thursday, impacting as early as maybe Friday morning, possibly as late as Friday afternoon, potentially even Saturday. So we're talking about all of next week here. So again, this goes back to the fact that there is time. There is still time to watch and wait and see what solutions start to go through. So going back to this weekend, we should have higher confidence. By Monday, we should be able to say, okay, here's the storm and here's the cone, and we should be showing the set area. So we should be able to highlight on Monday what areas are most likely going to be affected. And again, impacts will range outside of the cone. Impacts will be far greater than just the center of the storm. So keep that in mind as well. If it ends up much further off to the west, which again, in my mind, is not really a likely solution at this point, it's possible, but it's not a likely solution. It obviously would be further back in time because it has to travel further away from where the storm is located. So that would be Friday, Saturday, potentially as late as Sunday, maybe even as late as Monday, depending on how far west it did wobble or go to. So this is the ultimate if forecast for our area or for really the Gulf of Mexico. So I certainly hope that that helps as far as the timelines go and the potentials for what we could see. So again, just trying to be as definitive and clear as I can on all of the things that I can cross off the list for you and what's going through your mind and the potential outcomes here. And there's a lot of potential outcomes. There's a lot of uncertainty. So certainly not saying that something is going to happen here and you're going to be impacted by that. That's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to highlight that, yes, there is a potential for something significant in the Gulf of Mexico. And really, anyone in the Gulf of Mexico, even the Carolinas, Georgia, could be impacted by this system, just depending on exactly where it does go. And we are starting to get a clearer picture, but that picture is still a very broad picture. So I always equate forecasting to, it's like seeing a picture from the opposite end zone on a football field. And as you get closer in time, that picture is going to be clearer. You're going to start to be able to pick out details. You're going to start to be able to pick out what the picture is actually. Because when you're standing in the other end zone, you're going to be looking at this picture and go, yeah, there's a picture there, but I don't know what it is. When you're standing on the 50-yard line, you're going to go, well, I know what this picture is, but I can't really see anything that's going on in the picture. When you're standing on the 25-yard line, you're going to be looking at the picture going, okay, I can see some details here. And then when you're standing on the 10-yard line, 5-yard line, and then when you get into the other end zone, you're going to see a very clear picture. Well, that's the same thing with time in forecasting. We have a picture, but the further you go out in time, the further back you're getting away from that picture and the harder it is to actually see those details. So as we step forward in time, Saturday, Sunday, we should have a better picture of what is going on here. As we get into Monday, we should be able to highlight that, yeah, okay, we know where the storm is potentially going, who is going to potentially see impacts, and that what those impacts may be. As we get into Monday and Tuesday, depending on the location of the storm, we should be able to start highlighting the impacts and the potential for what areas should see. As we get day before the storm, we're going to be able to dissect, okay, this is who's going to see what, this is how you're going to be impacted. So I always like to say in tropical forecasting that you get 3 days. You get 5 days if you're lucky, but you get, in reality, 3 days. You get 3 days of a clear picture of what's going to happen. That's with every storm, no matter where it starts, no matter what it does. You get 3 days. 3 days out, that's when we know. That's when we're going to be talking about exactly what's going on, what's happening. So just keep that in mind as we do go forward. Right now, we're 5+ days out. So we're still really far away from seeing that clear impact and that clear picture from what's actually going on. But there is the potential there, and we see that potential. So that's what we're highlighting. That's what we're trying to do. The great news is that our weather actually looks pretty good as we go forward. Rain chances staying very, very low. Temperatures are going to be much cooler as we head into the weekend and then going into next week. We have one cold front coming in tomorrow, really tonight into tomorrow. And then Saturday and Sunday, we'll have another front approaching. Monday and Tuesday, that front does come through. And that is why we should see some of that will impact inevitably the system. That's part of that trough that we're talking about. And then Wednesday, Thursday for our area, that's when we're wholly going to be focused on the potential for the Panhandle if a storm is coming in this direction. Then obviously impacts could be as early as Thursday night or maybe Friday morning of next week. So that's where we are. That's our timeline. That's our forecast. And I think I have talked forever. So I'm going to wrap things up. Let's get to questions. Spencer, what you got?
I just think it might be important to hammer home, just in case there's people that weren't here at the beginning. What days are the important days to pay attention to next week when we'll have a little bit more confidence in the forecast?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. So again, I'm getting the questions here. I do have my comment section up. I do also have Spencer. I lost connection here on the surface, so that's not working. But I do have the comment sections up. Spencer is going to comb through the comment sections for me so that I can see what those questions are. But if you are answering on my Facebook Live, I do have those comment sections up as well. So I will try to answer whatever questions I see on there that I haven't already answered. If I've already answered those questions, I might get to them, but I've probably already answered them, which means you should go back and rewatch the video. This will be posted on those pages. It'll also be posted on mypanhandle.com. You can find more information as we do go forward on mypanhandle.com. And if you don't have the Storm Track 13 app already downloaded on your phone, it's a great resource tool, especially when we have tropical activity coming in, because it's going to give you warnings. It has the spaghetti models available to it. It will have the cone on it when the cone becomes available, when the storm does develop and we have a trackable entity that will show the cone. It'll show all of those kinds of things as well. So all of those things are possible, or are very useful, and they come from our system. So if you got any questions, comments, and concerns, again, going back on the timeline, if you're just joining, if you've just come in and you're seeing this, the timeline here showing the Keys, South Florida, if a storm were to impact that area, it'd be Monday, Tuesday. If we're going from South Florida up to, say, Fort Myers, we're talking Tuesday, Wednesday for potential impacts. From Fort Myers up to the Bend through Tampa, Wednesday, Thursday. And then Panhandle and Bend, we're probably talking Thursday, Friday, depending on how far west it would be later in time. So the further west you go, further back in time we're talking. So if you get all the way to, say, Mississippi, we're talking Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and same thing with Louisiana. So that's where we are there. What else? What else we got? I see a lot of questions about reservations and things like that on vacation. I wouldn't cancel anything right now. I mean, if a storm were to hit South Florida or Fort Myers, then we have nice weather here. We'll have the wind out of the northwest. It'll be sunny all day long. It'll be beautiful. In fact, we'll have gorgeous conditions. We'll have dry air. It'll be cooler. It'll be really, really nice. So I wouldn't cancel anything right now. I certainly would be keeping a very close eye on the forecast and seeing for any kind of potential impacts, especially anywhere across the Gulf of Mexico. But I certainly wouldn't be canceling any kind of plans at the current moment in time, because there's just too much uncertainty as to what's going to happen. If you're not planning a vacation and you live here and you live across one of these areas, you have a home across one of these areas, then you should be in that prep mode. You should be going through the steps of what you need to do to get ready, what you need to be ready, and have the hurricane kits ready, stored, ready to go. Those are all things that you need to do. As we get closer, say Sunday and Monday, if we're in the cone on Monday, then that's when I'm going to be saying, hey, like, you need to board up the things that you need to board up. If you're planning to evacuate, get the supplies to evacuate and pay close attention to the forecast. Obviously, things can still change as we do get closer, and slight shifts will make a big impact as to the overall impacts to the area. But Monday, in my mind, is when going to be decision day. It's going to be, okay, well, this is what the area that's most likely going to be impacted, and that's will be decision day. So if we're in the cone on Monday, then I would be saying, we're 5 days in at that point in time. So Monday, going Thursday, Friday, we're 5 days in. That's when you're in the set mode. So that means you should be prepping full tilt and ready to do it. And then as we get to Wednesday, you should be in the go mode. That's days 1, 2, and 3 out from the storm. That's when you're in go mode. So depending on where you are on the coastline, you should step it back from there. Now, obviously, we don't have a storm yet, so the only areas that may get a little rushed is if this develops further off to the north and it develops quickly, say the Euro solution, and then you're South Florida. Those are the areas that might get a little rushed, and then you may go from step ready to step go in a day. So that's very possible if it does, because we're cutting down the distance, which means we're cutting down the time. But I would check back the forecast. I would have a much better idea as we go through the weekend. And the further we get, or the closer we get to the storm, the more clear that picture is going to become, and the better details we're going to be able to offer. So as we get into Saturday and Sunday, that's when you really should be paying attention, checking the forecast often, seeing how things have changed. We get into Monday and Tuesday, you really want to be paying attention, checking the forecast as often as possible, especially if we're in the cone at that point in time. Then you really want to be checking the forecast probably at least once daily, if not twice daily. I use this reference all the time, and I don't want to harp on this, but I use this reference all the time. I still have people tell me Hurricane Michael was a Category 2 the night before. That's a lie. It wasn't a Category 2 the night before. It was a Category 3 at 11 a.m. on Tuesday. So it was a Category 3. Unless you went to sleep Tuesday morning and didn't wake up until Wednesday morning, it wasn't a Category 2 when you went to sleep. It was a Category 3. It was already a major hurricane. So it became a major at 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning, and it made landfall around noon on Wednesday. So to me, what that says is that those people watched the forecast on Monday, didn't check the forecast on Tuesday, and then, in their head, it was a Category 2 the night before because they never checked the forecast on Tuesday. So that's why we're harping about check the forecast as often as possible, intensity forecasts change, and just because we're expecting this to get into the Gulf of Mexico and become a significant storm doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case. This could end up being a much weaker storm. There's lots of things that could derail it, say dry air or positive vorticity gets in there, sneaks underneath the ridge, and it impacts the storm and creates a little bit of shear. All of those things are very possible. Intensity forecasts are still very much like throwing darts at a dartboard. Just because the conditions look favorable right now doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have a significant storm. It just appears favorable based off of the forecast that we have. Things can change. So again, lots of aspects, lots of details to iron out between now and Monday. But we will have a clearer picture on Monday, and we'll have a much better idea of potentially narrowing down the zone of who is going to be impacted. And then as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll be talking about how those impacts will happen. And then obviously Wednesday and Thursday, if it's heading toward our area, we'll be talking specific impacts. So that's days 1 through 3. Again, you get 3 days. Get 3 days of intimate knowledge of a storm. Anything beyond that is a luxury. And we're sitting here, what are we out? 8 days now? We're 8 days out. And we're talking about, we're 8 to 9 days out. And we're talking about, giving you these details now. So this is the luxury of how far forecasting has come, even since 2018. So the forecasting has really, really changed and has significantly significantly greater now than it was even in 2018, and definitely better than it was in 04, 05. And so certainly lots of forecasting things have gotten better and more significant. And so this is how we're increasing that lead time and decreasing those errors. So hopefully this has helped. If I didn't get to your questions, I'm sorry. I've been scrolling through them, trying to see what questions are on there, all those kinds of things. I'm not seeing a whole lot of things that I haven't answered. What do you got? You got something? Yeah, that's a good question. So that's a great question. Category 3. Major is major. Category 3, if you're going to be impacted by the eye wall, or you're expecting to be impacted by the eye wall, which means that you're going to be very near the center of the storm, Cat 3 and up, go see ya, go bye. Because major is major. It doesn't matter if it's Category 3, Category 4, Category 5. Now, obviously, a 5 is worse than a 3. That's just simple addition and subtraction. But, and we're talking about on a logarithmic scale here. So Category 5 is far more impactful. It's about 200 times more impactful than a Category 3. Category 5 is 500 or 400 times more impactful than a Category 1. So, yeah, so I say 1 and 2, you can ride it out if you feel comfortable. But, you know, even a 1 and 2, if you're not comfortable, especially if you were here during Michael and you rode through Michael and you had that experience, I would say go deuces, like bye, you know, roll out and then come back after the storm. I mean, you know, in reality, what are you going to do while the storm is ongoing? And then really, what are you going to do right after the storm? Like if you lose power and all those kinds of things, you don't have toiletries, you don't have a way to cook food, you really don't have anything that you can do and significantly contribute by staying. Just make sure that your location, your house, whatever is prepped and ready to go, and then leave and then come back when it's safe to come back. And that certainly not only helps out first responders, it helps out every individual along the way is waiting to come back and leaving. Everybody is in a safer place. I mean, we had not to get on the morbid side of things, but we had a lot of fatalities during Michael that weren't really related to the storm. They were related to either cleanup or they were related to emergencies that happened during the storm, meaning heart attack or something in that case, injuring himself outside of what was happening during the storm. Because first responders, they're not going out in a hurricane. They're not going to come get you. They're not. They can't. You know, they're not going to put themselves and potentially everybody else in danger to go rescue you during an emergency in a hurricane. So we had a good amount of fatalities that just happened to be unrelated storm emergencies that happened during Michael. So again, that kind of goes back to if you're not comfortable staying during a 1 and 2, bye. For me, my comfort level is 3. At 3, you should be out. That's where I think you should be out. Certainly when we're saying a major hurricane is forecasted to impact our area, if you have any kind of hesitation at all, leave. Don't stay. I don't think anyone should be here during a major hurricane, but that's my personal opinion, just because I don't know what you're contributing by staying. So that's me. So that was a good question. Very, very good question. What else? You see anything else?
No, I just want to reiterate that we'll have daily updates on both our website and our social media pages. So make sure you're checking those daily.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good point as well. We have plenty of information here, and if you've just joined us, this will be on mypanhandle.com, so you can rewatch that video on mypanhandle.com. I will take some of these slides and I will post them to that page as well, so you'll be able to see that. Make sure to join us at 5, 6, and 10 daily. Make sure to join the morning crew in the morning, because we're going to continue to give updates, and every hour and really every 4 hours, because that's when we get new model data, every 4 to 6 hours, we're going to be seeing a clear picture. We're going to get a better information. We're going to get more information in. So as that time does come along and we go forward, we're going to have more information. So right now, what I know, and then what I'll know at 10 o'clock is going to be slightly different. So we're going to be updating this forecast. We're going to be talking about the potential changes to the forecast as well as we do go forward. So I'd say check the forecast at least daily. If you can do it twice daily, do it twice daily. If you're following me on social media, if you're watching me on social media already, just go ahead and click that follow button because you'll be able to get those updates, because I post a lot of information on there, probably too much information, but I do post a lot of information on there, and I'm very active. I see almost every comment. So if you're leaving a comment, try to think about that. I'm a human. I'm a person. I have feelings too, okay? So if you're going to be mean, maybe don't put the comment on there. And if you are going to be mean, you're probably going to get a mean comment back, because it is my page. So, you know, you get what you give. Okay. And then obviously you can reach me in other ways as well. But the whole team, Grace, Kristen, and I, we're all very active on social media. So we'll try to answer those questions as we do go along. Certainly any questions that we didn't answer here. And we're going to try to, you know, get you guys through this. I mean, hey, we're in the same boat. I was here during Michael, did all of that, was at the station during Michael, was forecasting all of that. I know what it's like to go through a significant system. And have the PTSD along with everyone else in Bay County. I know exactly what you're feeling. I know the anxiety that comes up even when we're just talking about a storm, let alone the potential for a significant one. So again, I get it. Right now, prep, ready, wait. That's it. That's all you can do. Be prep, ready, and wait. And then as we get closer in time and we have a better idea of the forecast, then we'll deal with that as we deal with that. And guess what? Weather's going to weather. Storm could come here. Just because we got impacted 4 years ago doesn't mean that we're not due, or that somebody else is due, or somebody else should get it. It could come here. It's a very real possibility. So, once you get over that, you get over the fear and the anxiety of it. If you're prepped and you're ready, that should take a lot of the anxiety away. Because you're going to know you're ready for the storm. So I would just go ahead and say prepped, ready, wait, check back in on the forecast. That's all you can really do at this point in time.
Thank you for watching Tropic Topics, sponsored by Peden Heating and Air Conditioning and Marietta Toyota. Be sure to download the StormTrack 13 app today to stay up to date with all of the latest weather information. For more local news, weather, sports, and more, visit mypanhandle.com.